Hi everyone, I'm Rebecca Wojteska, the Managing Director of Horn Publishing. Just to give a visual description of myself, I'm a white woman with long blondish hair, and I'm wearing a black cardigan and I have a white background with an abnormally large clock hung on the wall. So Horn Publishing is dedicated to promoting new and underrepresented voices in Gothic and horror. In 2021 to 22, we will be publishing 3 new books, a poetry collection, an anthology, and a novel. Today, I'll be chatting to the authors and editor so we can all get to know them better. Also, right now we are actually crowdfunding for these 3 books via Kickstarter. The link is in the description for you to go and support fiercely independent publishing, as well as these amazing, incredible authors. So we're going to kick off the event by kind of going around the table and introducing ourselves. I've kind of already been, so we'll go to Anna.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Cheung. Just to give a visual description of myself, I'm Chinese. I have long black hair. I have a navy shirt on with a golden astrological symbols on it. And in the background, there's a big plant and a surrealist painting that my son did for me for free. So just more about myself. I'm a poet based in Glasgow, Scotland. And my debut collection is called Where Decay Sleeps, and that will be published through Haunt in September.
Perfect, thank you, Anna. And we'll go to Lauren.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lauren T. Davila. I'm a Latina writer from California in the United States. Just as a means of description, I'm a Latina woman with long, dark brown hair and glasses. I'm wearing a green dress you can barely see, and I'm in front of a foggy, wooded virtual background. The book I'm editing is an anthology of BIPOC Gothic short stories titled When Other People Saw Us, They Saw the Dead. It features around 25 authors from around the world at different stages in their publishing journey, and I'm so excited for everybody to read it.
Me too. And finally, we'll go to Joanna.
Hi, my name's Joanna Corrance, and I'm a solicitor based in the Highlands of Scotland. My first publication was a novella called John's Eyes, published by Luna Press Publishing. And I'm the author of The Gingerbread Men, which is a horror novel based in the Highlands of Scotland as well. And it tells the story of a reality close to our own, with our main character, Eric, who leaves his fiancée in the Edinburgh Christmas market to follow a strange woman back to a hotel that she owns in the Highlands, a hotel that is staffed entirely by men who carry out domestic duties by day, but tell stories in front of the fire at night to entertain the woman who owns the hotel. And as time passes, our main character, Eric, starts to get suspicious of what's going on around him. He realizes that there's never any guests in the hotel, it always snows, and none of them can ever go home.
Oh, the mystery, I love it. And before we go, a little description of yourself, Joanna.
Just as a visual description of myself, I am a white woman with long red hair. I'm wearing a grey polo neck with black dungarees, and I've got a backdrop of a bookcase in a white room with a large window looking out on trees.
We are rocking the backgrounds, I must say. So lovely. I think my first question I will direct to Anna. So obviously you mentioned the Gothic poetry collection that you have written. And within this poetry collection, there are 36 poems, which is very ambitious and very awesome. Could you talk us through the process behind writing the poems and where you draw inspiration?
Yes, I grew up listening to Chinese folklore tales, and also like ghost stories that my mum used to tell me. And I love to watch Chinese drama that were based on myths and legends, like the fox spirits and hopping vampires and demons, like all these different creatures that come out of the Chinese folklore. But at the same time, I was really fascinated by other creatures from mythology and also fiction as well, like Dracula, zombies, also ogres, and just other creatures as well. So I think as a child, I would absorb all these stories And when I grew up, it never actually left me. So when I wrote the collection, it was almost like I was exorcising these demons out of my system, and it was fun and like a good opportunity for me to kind of revisit these characters, and to to revamp the stories without having to like retell them, just tell them with a slant, and to kind of reinvent them in a certain way to give readers a different perspective of them. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And honestly, these poems are, you can see all the different inspirations that you've just mentioned as well, like the Chinese folklore and like modern technology as well, which people don't usually associate with the Gothic. So it's great to see that kind of blending of traditional and modern, I think. And I think a lot of modern Gothic is doing that as well. And there's certainly like elements of that in the BIPOC anthology too. So Lauren, I was wondering if you could tell us like how that idea came about for the anthology, and what were your aims when you just decided to create this amazing book?
Yeah, well, for me, it happened really organically, actually. I saw your call for Gothic short story collections, Rebecca, and so I had DM'd you wondering if you'd accept a pitch for an anthology, and it sort of snowballed from there. So as I was starting to think about this, I knew that I wanted to amplify voices that had maybe been historically marginalized in horror, specifically Gothic horror. And so I put out the call for BIPOC submissions on Twitter, and I had the lineup pretty much solidified, I want to say within about a week. It happened really quickly. And I did just want to say really quick, I had probably about 150 to 200 pitch submissions for short stories.
Wow.
And it was so difficult turning away some of these pitches. They were so fantastic. And that was probably the most difficult part for me, was really having to see all of these stories that we just didn't have the space and the scope for. But there are some amazing marginalized authors writing some fantastic Gothic stories out there. So even if it's not in this anthology, keep looking for short stories, because they are definitely out there.
And it just shows that if you have a really well-formed pitch and you know exactly what your pitch is going to be, what the book, the authors are in it, and also what your kind of target audience is going to be, like, go for it, because it can happen. So yay. So I'm very glad you stumbled across Horn anyway.
Oh, me too.
And then Joanna as well. So just a bit of background, I found you pitched on Expo North. So this wasn't actually to do with the with my call for submissions, but I found Joanna on a Twitter pitch and thought, well, that book looks amazing, and reached out. And what I loved about the book as well was kind of the sense of place in it. So I loved that it starts in Edinburgh and then it leads us up to the Scottish Highlands. So I guess I wanted to know how important place was to you when you were planning this book.
I think for me, location is really important when I'm writing, and particularly having a familiarity with the place that I'm writing, because I think that when you're trying to create a world for your readers, and this is why I have a lot of admiration for a lot of fantasy writers who can build completely imaginary worlds and just suck the reader in. And for me to achieve that, I think I do need to know not just visually what the world around me is like, but I need to be able to hear it, feel it, smell it, and I think all of those things can help your reader, even if they've never been to the place that you're writing about. It can draw them in and allow them to get a real sense of what's going on in the story. So having been born and brought up in the Highlands and then living in Edinburgh for a number of years, there are two places that are both really close to my heart, and also that I've got a real familiarity with, and I know them well enough to write, I hope, convincingly. So
yeah, I loved that I was in the Christmas market in particular. I have good and bad memories of the Christmas market, so as do the characters in your book, I'm sure. But so now we're going to have a little pause, and we're going to hear a poem by Anna Cheung, which I'm very excited about. So Anna, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to read a poem called Satan's Garden. I actually wrote this a couple of years back, so it was really kind of interesting to see my writing kind of change, throughout the years. But I still really like it myself. Red across black, the blood moon smeared her lunar cycle across the night, staining the sky from scarlet to rust. His garden awakened Anglua uniflora, baby swaddled in skin petals, bleary eyes beaded with dewdrops, mouths gaping in silence, arms yearning. Lampocapnus spectabalis, fuchsia hues veined in blue, bleeding hearts heavy on tender stems, steep in sorrow. Titan arum, blooms of decayed flesh perfumed the air, a bouquet of sulphur, sueur, and death. A breath of wind exhaled, and the flowers swayed in saddened symphony under the silence of the crimson moon.
I guess we could make a noise. That's fine. Oh, that is awesome. And yeah, that's the kind of the poem that we took a snippet from for the blurb on the campaign as well. So we thought we'd share the whole thing with everyone. So thank you very much for that, Anna. And we touched on before how your collection does merge that kind of traditional Gothic with modern technology concepts, including Tinder. There is a poem called Monster Tinder, where it is the bios of monsters on Tinder, such as Frankenstein, which I absolutely love. But how important was it to you to kind of merge those two worlds, and what was your thought process and aims behind doing that?
Yes, I was interested to see what kind of synergy could be created by bringing monsters into the modern world, and what kind of stories can be fabricated from, like combining the old and the new. And I wanted to put these creatures out of their comfort zone, right? And I wanted to see how they would react, and I created these what if scenarios. So I'll ask questions like, what if monsters were dating and they had to use the Tinder app? What would happen if they went clubbing and listened to techno music? So by asking all these questions, I was able to see it gave me a fresh perspective of the narrative and the story that I could write for them. And it allowed me to approach these iconic characters from just a different angle, which is quite important when you're writing about like traditional monsters. So all these unique situations just kind of came out of all these kind of stories that it just reflected the creatures in a different light.
Yeah, I would definitely. I was going to say I would definitely swipe right, but I'm not really sure which is which. which is the good one.
I had to do research for that, right? So yeah. I'm not actually quite down with the modern technology myself. So swipe left is when you're kind of dismissing, and then swipe right is a like I like type thing.
Yeah,
so
I'd swipe right on them all. Give them all a chance. So yeah, thinking about themes and everything with the BIPOC anthology, Lauren. There are loads of themes in that. Like, what I loved about it is there's a strong sense of Gothic running throughout it, but it does draw in other themes and maybe smidgens of other genres as well. So I was wondering if you could, talk us through what themes were important to you when you were going through these hundreds of submissions, and what were you looking for?
Yeah, so I think for me, mostly I really just wanted to see how a BIPOC identity influences the idea of like the Gothic, in quotes, big G, and sort of what changed when an author brought in ideas of race and culture to the forefront of this genre that has, spanned centuries and countries, and even to beyond necessarily race, but like other diverse experiences, right? Like religion, sexuality, neurodivergence, disabilities. There's lots of marginalized identities that are represented in this short story collection. And not every single story necessarily fully explores the ideas or has the, main character named as a specific marginalization, but I think the through line with all of the stories is really strong. And interestingly enough, some of the stories are actually adaptations of canon Gothic texts. And so to even see those stories filtered through the lenses of diversity, I think it's definitely a direct response to the idea of Gothic horror being so predominantly white for so long. But each of these stories really interrogates eeriness in its own way, and I think they work really well together as a collection. And Rebecca, sort of as you touched on, right, not all of them are necessarily only Gothic. There's, fantasy in here. We're in the modern world, maybe some more different. There's, definitely other genres represented in here beyond just necessarily Gothic. So I think it's going to be great.
Definitely. And you touched on the retellings, and I thought it was really funny because my first book, Haunted Voices, had a Bluebird retelling in it. and Anna's collection has a Bluebeard retelling in it, and this anthology has a Bluebeard retelling in it. So Joanna, you might want to think about one of the stories that the men tell around the fire.
Oh yeah.
I think we don't want to break the curse.
Yeah, I think there's one Bluebeard retelling, and then there's like a Bluebeard / Jane Eyre retelling. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but there's something else also in there. So we have 2 stories that sort of revolve around that, you know, locked room, what's happening, going on. Yeah, it's great.
Which I love. Carving out a niche for Horn, Bluebeard retellings. So Joanna, one thing that struck me with the Gingerbread Men is kind of how you wrote men and women and approached gender. I was wondering if you could talk us through how you approached writing gender roles and, you know, in a dark fairy tale horror sense, and why this was important to you.
I think that many of the books that I've read in the past have applied quite specific roles and characteristics to men and women, which comes across really clearly in the writing. And generally that's something I try, or I hope that I avoid doing in my own writing most of the time. But with the Gingerbread Men and the idea that I had for it, I thought it would be really interesting to actually work with some of those roles and characteristics that are applied to men and women, and just really mix them up a bit. So what we see is at the start, there's those stereotypes, those characteristics, and those roles are very firmly in place. But as the story goes on within Delia's hotel, it's a world of her own where things start to change and the roles are all flipped on their heads, and the men don't even know that it's happening to them as it goes along, which is, I suppose, how it happens in real life as well. And as the story goes on, even the staff members that want to escape from the hotel are restricted in their ability to do so by these norms that are created and these behaviours that exist within Delia's hotel, which stops them from doing so. So it was I felt that by playing with those roles, it really helped me move the story along, and the dark fairy tale really lent itself to that.
Yeah, it definitely did. And I think it was a massive selling point for me as well. I remember reading it, and there was one thing where the men are having afternoon tea, which is a perfectly normal thing, lots of people do, but seeing it written down in a book made me realise people never write men doing that. And it's just like, it just makes you realize how gender is approached in writing, and kind of what's published, what we read. So yeah, I thought it was great to kind of confront that like head on and flip it on its head, as you said. So yeah, I'm so excited for all these books, by the way. I'm like grinning the whole time. We are going to have another little break from questions, and we're going back to Joanna, who is going to give us a reading from the Gingerbread Men. I believe you're reading a bit of the opening chapter.
Yes. Yeah. I decided to leave my fiancé on Christmas Eve, the very same day that I had proposed to her. We stood beneath a snow-filled sky at the Christmas market in the city, hot drinks clasped between our gloved hands and glowing from the thrill of our recent engagement. Eleanor, my fiancé, was choosing new baubles for our Christmas tree, which, on her insistence, had been erected at the end of November. I had tried to explain that the needles would fall off, and by Christmas Day we would be left with balding branches and a clogged hoover. If it were up to her, she would probably have kept the tree up all year round. There was no hesitation. I made my decision in the seconds between her putting down a matte bauble and replacing it with a glossy red one, as she deliberated over what would suit the tree's garish aesthetic better. When people spoke about leaving their long-term partner, it was usually after months or even years of painful deliberation, after the fighting had become too much or the indifference too lonely. But it wasn't like that for me. Oblivious, Eleanor continued to chatter away, radiating the rosy-cheeked chirpiness that seemed to come with being a newly qualified primary school teacher. Her family, all headmistresses and doctors and niche specialities, had the kind of relationships you see in nice, family-friendly films. I knew that that was meant to be a good thing, but it could leave you feeling a bit inadequate.
Need to unmute myself so I can clap. Thank you. Lauren, you need to come to the Edinburgh Christmas market so you can experience the joy, shall we say.
I will have to. We just don't have Christmas markets in California.
Makes sense, but but it is worth it. Oh, you've taken me back to winter. So thank you very much for that, Joanna. I have another question for you, Anna. Your debut poetry collection was supposed to be published in September of 2020. Unfortunately, this was delayed because of the pandemic. So I was wondering if you could just tell us in general how the pandemic affected your writing.
Yes, I found it really difficult to find time to write because I was working at the time during the lockdown, and I was also doing the homeschooling as well. So suddenly I was an employee, I was a maths teacher, English teacher, a gym teacher, and also a parent as well. So when you're in all those kind of different mindsets, it's really difficult to get into that the zone. I don't know if I'm sure Joanna and Lauren will know what the zone is, where you need to have the space and the quiet time to just reflect and use your imagination and let it kind of flourish and like come to the fore. So when you're really busy like that and you don't have time to be in that zone, it's really quite difficult to be inspired and to motivate yourself as well. So when I did find time that to do any sort of writing, I'll just do it in short bursts whenever I could fit in from the rota that I had, and I found it really difficult because I was stuck indoors all the time. It's difficult to find inspiration from just being stuck within four solid walls. And during that time, I found it really helpful to engage with other writers within the community, because I found out that I wasn't just feeling the same emotions myself, but other people were feeling the exact same thing as me. And it made me feel better in a way that I wasn't alone in feeling that. And other writers will like give tips, like giving advice and stuff like that. And I realized that, you know what, it's not the end of the world if you can't write for a few months. Sometimes you need to just look after yourself, take a step back, and just kind of reevaluate everything. And then sometimes when you do take a step back is when you feel like you've got more to give, because you're not kind of pushing yourself in that kind of situation. So yeah, I did find it difficult.
Yeah. I think that's good advice all around, like step back and, take those breaks when you need them and come back when you can, and then you're in the right headspace. So thank you for sharing that. Lauren as well. So we did touch on it a little bit before about you creating this anthology, but I was wondering if you could share, just for anyone else who wanted to do the same thing, your experience of putting it together and then pitching it to publishers. And also, I believe you're doing this while doing a PhD as well. So
yes. Yeah. So So as we kind of talked about it above, but it was a little bit of chance actually. So I was in the process of working on Latine Anthology, which has now been split up into two anthologies. So I'm doing a YA one and an adult with two other publishers. I have lots of anthologies in the works when I saw your call for submissions on Twitter. So I didn't necessarily pitch this specific project to another press. I was really ready to, take on the stories and compile them for other presses if this didn't work out, but I'm so glad it did. I'm loving Haunt. But the process of editing an anthology is actually really different from other publishing ventures. Like personally, I've published like journalism, poetry, flash fiction, short stories, all across the board. An anthology is just a whole different beast or monster. As I kind of touched on, I think the most labor intensive part of the process is really sorting through all of the amazing pitches and having to reject so many options. So personally, myself, really all I asked for was just, I think I normally say like a 2 to 4 sentence pitch of just your story overview, and I sort of go from there. I know other editors of anthologies will ask for a sample page. I really think personally I'd rather see the story scope and work with a writer to get the writing maybe where it needs to be if it's not as strong, rather than say no to an amazing story just based off of necessarily the prose itself. So that's something that's really difficult. And then after figuring out the anthology pitch as a whole, it's really just a matter of sending it out to small or mid-sized presses. And that's really cold calling, cold pitching, whatever you want to call it, through email or slipping into Twitter or Instagram DMs if that's the way to go, which worked for me with Rebecca. So it's a long waiting process, but it's really rewarding. The collection is fantastic, where all the authors that I've compiled are just stars. Rebecca's read all the stories, so she can back me up on this, but they've worked so hard on their edits and pushing past comfort levels, and it's really fulfilling to be able to work on those individual short stories on, a a line to line basis and pushing some of the authors even past what they've talked about. And it's really paid off. So I can't wait for it to be in the world and for everybody to be as spooked by the stories as Rebecca and I were. They Saw the Dead it's just a fantastic collection. I can't wait.
It really is. And I think it's really important as well to, in general, just demystify that publishing process a bit and be transparent about how books come to be. So like with Anna, I just emailed Anna and said, please let me publish your collection. I love your poetry. And obviously, Lauren, you pitched to me. And Joanna, I found your pitch online. And in the spirit of transparency, Joanna, you're still actually writing The Gingerbread Men.
Yeah, that's right.
And also working as a solicitor, and before the pandemic you were also running a guest house. So I was wondering if you could share kind of top tips on how you juggle writing projects, especially something lengthy like your own novel, and how do you juggle that alongside all your other responsibilities?
I think because for me, writing is something that I've always loved. I can't imagine not doing it. So it's a bit like a hobby or exercise for me. I'm quite lucky at the moment in that I've got more time than usual to dedicate to writing, but certainly a while ago there was a time where I was really, really busy. And what I would do was I would set an alarm in the morning and I would get up first thing and I'd have a dedicated period of time for writing. And then on my lunch break in work, I'd be sat there like sandwich in one hand, pen in the other, and I'd be writing my stories. And the same went for the evenings. But I would say that one of the really important things that I had to learn from that was how to keep the love of it. Because I think if you push yourself too hard and you say you have to do this at these times, you do lose that love, and it's the love and the passion for it that really pushes you to work really hard. So what I did was I stopped and thought, right, what time of day do I work best at? And for me, that's morning, really, really early in the morning. And then, I can be done by late morning, early afternoon. I also really enjoy handwriting, everything that I do. I absolutely hate typing with a passion. So doing that, first of all, really helps my process. And also when I do start to get frustrated or I get a bit of writer's block, then I'll start illustrating and doodling the story. And that really helps me along with what I'm doing. Alternatively, if it's really bad, I can stick my headphones in, go for a walk and visualize the story to music. So I think there's all these things that you can do. And I would say that, juggling work and writing, the real key is, I suppose, just keep that love of it and make sure you don't lose it. Figure out how to make writing work for you so that it doesn't feel like work, and, figure out if what time of day works best for you, or whether you like writing by hand, computer, typewriter, in pictures, whatever it is. And because when you really love something that much, then you're always going to do it no matter what, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, I feel between you all, we've got some great top tips for aspiring writers, aspiring editors, of kind of what to do and how to approach it. I'm always open for any questions as well. If anyone ever wants to message me, the Haunt socials will be in the, what's the word now? The bio thing of the YouTube thing. I know technology.
If anybody has questions about anthologies too, I'm always open to discuss that.
Oh, thank you. I will also put your bio things in the social things. So we did actually get a few Twitter questions as well. A few of them were about inspiration, and we did kind of cover that as well. I think, so first we'll go to Anna. We got a question in asking, to what extent do themes of mental health and mental illness inform your poetry?
When I was writing this collection, I didn't actually have a theme in mind. I just kind of freestyled it and just wrote whatever came to mind and what felt right at the time. And then the more I started writing, I realised that certain themes started to reoccur. And one of these themes was mental health. And I think mental health affects everyone, particularly in the past year and the difficulties of the past year. And I think it's important that people have conversations about mental health, whether that's like over the phone or like through text or just in person or through literature even. And I think that by opening up these conversations, you're letting people know that, they're not alone in feeling these feelings, and there's other people out there as well who feel exactly the way they do. And I hope that that's enough to kind of alleviate some of that isolation that people feel. And also read that reading itself is actually an effortless way of to mindfulness. So when you read, what it does, it anchors you to the present moment and to the words that you're reading, and you're involved in the characters and the stories of some place or someone else in some other destination. And what it does, it actually takes you away from your own bubble, your kind of anxiety or depression bubble, and it really does help as a tool to help alleviate feelings of like stress and anxiety and stuff like that. So I like to think of it as twofold, like literature, like to raise awareness of mental health, and also like reading itself as a tool to help people to overcome some of these kind of pressures and anxieties. Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I found during the pandemic and even before, like when things are overwhelming, a bit too much, just jammies on in the bed, book out and just take that time for yourself as well. And I've been doing that with all of your guys' books, so so they're good. So Joanna, we had a question for you as well. Someone asked about your characters and wondering what your favorite and least liked traits about your characters were.
I think all the characters in the book are flawed in their own way, and all in very different ways as well. I suppose if I were to look at one in particular that's a really unlikable trait, it would be our main character, Eric, who it's abundantly clear from the beginning that he's a very selfish character and very self-serving, and he will frequently do things that have negative impacts on other people's lives in order to benefit himself. So that's a very negative trait that he has. But on the background of that, he's also a very insecure and vulnerable character as well. So I think he's very much molded by his past. And if I were to say a trait that I really like in one of the characters is one of the staff members, an older man called Edward. He is unconditionally in love with Delia, and he, unlike everybody else, he sees her without giving too much away for what she really is, and he still loves her, and nothing's going to change that. But again, on the flip side, the flaws of that are that he doesn't see what she's doing, he looks through it rather and lives in blissful ignorance, despite knowing deep down what's actually happening. So I suppose those are the two things. But particularly with Eric and Delia in the story, I think that they're both really complex characters who've been molded by their pasts and their experiences, and they're both selfish in their own way, and they can both be the way they treat others isn't very admirable in a lot of circumstances. I think that Delia gets a real sense of satisfaction from controlling people and her staff members, which later leads Eric to become very insecure and want to appear better, like a better version of himself in front of her. So he becomes increasingly desperate. But the thing is, I mean, the characters, they change so much throughout the story that you can pick a character trait and think, this is what I think of this character, and then by the end of the story you may think something completely different of them.
I love how you answered it but kept all the mystery of the book still in there.
That was difficult, actually.
No spoilers here. So I thought it'd be really interesting just to hear from everyone where your love of Gothic and horror kind of stemmed from. For me, it was probably Goosebumps. I was literally raised by Goosebumps from a very tender age. And yeah, it kind of just blossomed out from there. So I was just wondering how it was for you guys. We'll start with Lauren this time.
I feel like for me, I think you kind of touched on this. I'm in a PhD program studying Gothic horror right now and feminine death aesthetics. So I'm constantly reading in the genre, and I feel like some of those core texts really hooked me early on. Like probably I want to say like I'd say 5th or 6th grade is probably when I started really reading some of these, like Frankenstein, Goblin Market, Rebecca. I would even say like The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende was probably a pretty formative one for me. And so I think it just appeals to me, like that uncanniness, that sense of like how close the characters get to the eerie without it being full, horror. There's just like it's a closeness but a distance, and it's just really appealing to me. Yeah, and I feel like I probably with Rebecca, I was reading some of those like children's horror stories. You know, I remember, I think it's like the girl with the green ribbon around her neck. I remember that one being like a very formative story for me when I was younger. So I've always read some of these, and they've definitely always appealed.
For me, so for some reason, it's the sponge under the sink in the Goosebumps books. For some reason, that because I read them all, and obviously I've not read them again because, but yeah, the sponge for some reason stays with me. What about you, Anna?
It's hard to pinpoint exactly at which point I kind of became fascinated by Gothic, but I think even from as a young child, I was fascinated with the myths and legends and ghost stories that my mum used to tell me. I was this kind of strange, weird child who had a dark streak, but then I didn't grow out of that. I just became an even stranger teenager with like green hair, who read like I don't know, like Anne Rice, Stephen King, Mary Shelley, for instance, and I've listened to really heavy rock music like Cradle of Filth and Tura Satana, and I was also into the like occult as well. I did tarot reading and crystal dowsing, and also like pendulum dowsing and crystal healing as well. So I guess it wasn't just the literature, it's the whole Gothic culture that I was into. So I was like living, breathing, eating Gothic. So it was inevitable that I ended up writing Gothic as well. So it's pretty much very much like part of who I am. So it's quite difficult to kind of pinpoint, but yeah.
That sounds just like what I would expect from a Gothic poet for a background. I love that. And what about yourself, Joanna?
I think from a really young age, I've always been really obsessed actually with Gothic horror and horror stories. I was never one of those kids who got scared by it and would have nightmares at night. In fact, I think I would actively chase my parents around trying to get them to tell me horror stories that probably weren't appropriate for me at all. And I have a memory of picking up Dracula by Bram Stoker when I was wee, and just absolutely devouring it and thinking that this is just amazing. And it went on from there. You know, the thing I really like about horror and Gothic horror is I just think you get this real richness and depth of characters and settings, and you know, it just creates this really wonderful and frightening and unsettling, I suppose, world. As I've gotten older, you know, the likes of Angela Carter, more recently Kirsty Logan. I love these kind of unsettling stories that you read, and yeah, I think I don't know where I've got it from, but horror has always been something that's appealed to me as long as I can remember.
I just love that we were all creepy kids. It's one thing we have in common. So yeah, I thought I would just have a final question and just kind of have a whip around and see which kind of author would you recommend? So who is your current favorite author? You can say a contemporary one and a classic one if you want. I'll leave it entirely up to you. So we'll go with Anna first.
Okay, I'll start with contemporary first then. I came across this collection of like Gothic, is it Gothic? It's more like horror short stories, a collection of horror short stories by a Japanese writer called Asa Nanami. And the book is called The Body, and it's all like body horror. And the reason I love it so much is because he actually combines humor and horror in one, which is actually quite it can be quite rare actually to combine like the two elements together. And for me as a writer, it's something that I try to aspire to, because I think that especially if you write a whole collection, you need to be able to somehow kind of disperse it with some sort of lightness so it's not too heavy all the way through. So I really like that aspect of our writing. In regards to an oldie, I was sourcing some like nighttime like spooky listening on YouTube like a few weeks ago, and I found a collection of like Halloween short stories, but it's not, it doesn't mean it's like about Halloween, but it's for Halloween. So that's my typical lifestyle, like finding Halloween stories on like nowhere near Halloween time. And it was a collection of contemporary writers and contemporary stories, and I really enjoyed listening to it. But then suddenly, like in between, I think bang on in the middle, a story came on, and it was like The Telltale Heart. And I was like, and they didn't introduce it at all. It just launched straight into the story. And I went, oh my God, this is amazing. It's so suspenseful. And then I thought, hold on, I think I've actually read this story before somewhere. And then I realized it was Edgar Allan Poe. I thought, oh my God, this is like amazing. And because of the language is written, it's so archaic, and it's so like, it makes you really listen in. It's like, it's almost like you can feel the atmosphere and the tension, you know, like descend upon you. And it really makes you kind of, it chills you right through the bone. And as a contemporary writer myself, it's really difficult to create that same level of like gothic tension as Poe. Like, he is the master of tension and just I don't know, suspense. Absolutely, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love stumbling across like new writers as well, randomly, when you get deep in the hole on the internet.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the recommendations. And we'll go to Laura next.
So contemporary, I'd recommend Silvia Moreno Garcia. I don't know if any of you have read her novel Mexican Gothic. It's fantastic. It's lingered in the back of my head since it came out, and it's, you know, family drama, this mansion, 1950s Mexico. There's mushrooms throughout it. It's just, I don't want to give too much away, but if you haven't read it, go read it. I was going to say Poe, but Anna already did. If you haven't read it, it's an old novella. It's called The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell. I would recommend reading that one. It's probably, I would say, as I'm going through, you know, my PhD and studying it, one of the earliest examples of the like haunted little child ghost that pops up. It's so spooky, but just go read it if you get a chance.
And Joanna.
I think if I were to go for it, this is such a hard question. I was trying to think of it earlier because I knew it was coming up, and there's just so many. It's so difficult to say. But I think at the moment, as far as contemporary is concerned, I would say a book that really blew me away recently was Kirsty Logan's Things We Say in the Dark. And it's a collection of short stories, and they're just so unsettling. And I loved it. I finished that book with such a strange feeling, but still really enjoyed it as well. So I thought that was fantastic and very, very up my street. In terms of something more classic, I would probably say Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is one of my favorites. And everybody says that, but it's one of those books that evokes real emotion in me, despite being gothic horror, and it has monsters and things in it. It's this really sad story. So it's another example of how, you know, horror isn't just about jumps and scares. It's got so much more to it as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd have picked all these authors as well that you've all brought up if I was going to give top picks, after I've picked all you, of course. So those were good recommendations. Thank you. So yeah, that's kind of it from us. So I just want to say a massive thank you to our authors and editor, and the wee clap. I'll clap. There we go. For each other. And yes, if you can, do check out our Kickstarter and pledge to bring these 3 amazing books to life. And until next time, stay spooky.